We begin tonight as the shock of the death of Tony Gwynn recedes and is replaced by the pain with a question. Why are Major League Baseball players permitted to chew tobacco during games? It has been banned in the minors since 1993. It was thought in time that would mean that no players would come to the majors with that habit, or few. Peter Abraham of the Boston Globe surveyed the Red Sox in spring training this year. 21 of the 58 players he spoke to told him they use smokeless tobacco, dip or chew. The system isn't working. Before we go any further, doctors expert on the kind of cancer that killed Tony Gwynn on Tuesday are insistent that there is no known link between smokeless tobacco and parotid cancer, cancer of the salivary glands. But common sense tells us otherwise is to some degree irrelevant, that some of the doctors of 50 years ago were insistent that there was no link between smoking and cancer or any disease speaks for itself. Just as Tony Gwynn speaks for himself, even in death. From a 2010 interview, quote, Gwynn said the parotid cancer is on the right side of his face from the bottom of his ear to the chin. From another interview, of course it caused it. I always dipped on my right side.
There's no reason for a tumor to grow there other than the fact that, yeah, I used to shoot tobacco and put it on the right side. They can't tell me for sure, but that's how I'm going to approach it.
By 2010, Tony Gwynn had already undergone 2 surgeries on that cancer. After each operation, he resumed dipping. But so that any one of the holier-than-thou medical groups can't whine that we're using scare tactics here, let's just assume that Tony Gwynn did not die from chewing tobacco on the right side of his mouth, and that the cancer of the salivary glands on the right side of his mouth was just a coincidence caused by one of the, quote, recognized, unquote, risk factors like exposure to extreme radiation or working in fields like asbestos mining, because we all remember those seasons Tony Gwynn skipped playing baseball to go work mining asbestos with the right side of his mouth. I go back to the question, why are Major League Baseball players permitted to chew tobacco during games? The June 12, 1972 issue of Sports Illustrated depicted on its cover the should-be Hall of Famer Dick Allen of the Chicago White Sox with that cigarette in his mouth. There was outrage. What was amazing about the outrage was that at that point, this country was just 17 months removed from the start of the ban on cigarette commercials on television. Just 17 months after the time when an ad might pop up almost anywhere for smoking. 17 months from a time when baseball broadcasts could be fully sponsored by tobacco companies who could stuff literally several dozen tobacco ads into one game. Just 17 months later, we were already outraged about the example that a photo of a player might set for kids. How did that happen so quickly? Ask this other guy. I'm not sure it's the only reason, but Hannes Wagner was quoted as saying that he opposed the famous withdrawn baseball card made of him by Sweet Caporal and Piedmont Cigarettes because he didn't want to encourage kids to smoke. That was in 1909. That this might not have been the complete story is underscored by another card of Hannes Wagner from 1949, on which he is shown dipping tobacco. Hell, there were still baseball cards given away in the pouches of Red Man tobacco as late as 1955. This 1963 Topps of Billy Tuttle, the outfielder, might be the quintessential card of the era. In his cheek there, that's not bubble gum in there. This is also a picture of Bill Tuttle, 35 operations later. He used to go and talk to modern players about the dangers, or try to, with part of his tongue missing. Athletes no longer permitted to be cigarette pitchmen were still fair game for commercials for dipping. When NASCAR was still the Winston Cup, and how did we let that happen? There was a Skoal smokeless tobacco car. Today, that company is still part of the National Hot Rod Association with the Skoal Racing Mobile Marketing Unit that sets up at 23 races. The marketers proudly claim that since 2004, 500,000 people have visited their display of death. Odds are you're too young to remember this, but honest to God, in the 70s, we were told that if we were going to smoke, we were far better off smoking cigars or a pipe or just chewing. I heeded the warnings. I smoked cigars and a pipe for 27 years. As all the ball players who dip will tell you, it's a terrible addiction. There is some evidence that smokeless tobacco, that addiction is even worse. Plus, player after player say they only do it during games, not between them, not in the offseason. It's a baseball-specific, potentially fatal addiction. A nightmare to try to stop? Indeed. The only reason I ever stopped was they found something on the roof of my mouth, right over where I used to release the smoke from my pipes and cigars. And as they removed it with a laser, as the blood spurted, it suddenly dawned on me, hey, you know what? It would be a lot easier to quit if I don't have cancer than if I do. I bought a year's supply of nicotine gum, and fortunately it wasn't cancer. At least not yet. But in the wake of Tony Gwynn's death, here's the reality. The latest data on male high school students, the percentage who have smoked cigarettes in the last month, 16%. The percentage who have used smokeless tobacco in the last month, 11%. It's almost equal. If baseball permitted its players to smoke during games, or just to be seen with the bulge of a pack outlined in their uniform pants or a pocket somewhere, the way David Ortiz is seen with the bulge of chewing tobacco in his mouth every at-bat, the protests at Major League games would be so big, fans would never get past them to get inside the stadiums. So why are Major League Baseball players permitted to chew tobacco during games? Because simply and undeniably, no nuance to it, no dispute, the Baseball Players Association will not agree to a ban. And they're completely, utterly, indefensibly wrong. Guys can't quit. I get it. I've been it. But get it off the field. Cheat if you must in the clubhouses. Out of sight. Get it off the field. Get it off the field now. Get it off the field tomorrow. Get it off the field for Tony Gwynn.